McCown and Shannon back with you, and Dave Hodge is with us. Now, under usual circumstances, David, you and I and John talk baseball, and we intend to do that. But last night was an interesting night in the opening round of the Stanley Cup playoffs as Tampa kind of flexed their muscle and took it to the Toronto Maple Leafs pretty handily. What's your assessment of what happened last night? I assume you watched the game a bit.
You don't want to talk about Toronto being all abuzz about the Jays 4-2 win in Houston. Yeah,
we'll get to that, pal. Relax.
I don't see that.
Better the 4-2 victory than what happened to the Jays the night before, David.
Yeah, well, it was a good time for Chris Bassett to show why they signed him. Listen, the Leafs were a mess. It couldn't have been worse. You hear all the time the importance of the first goal, and there are stats that go with that, and you yawn and you say, yeah, okay, it should probably help to score the first goal. But I did think when that game started that it was very important for the Leafs, who finished well ahead of Tampa Bay, who were clearly favored, according to John Cooper, were huge favorites, which made the Lightning massive underdogs. I thought it was important that the Leafs show what Brendan Shanahan has claimed has been lacking for all of these years of failure under his leadership, and that's killer instinct. And killer instinct could have been shown early on with a 1-0 Leafs lead. 78 seconds into the game, the Leafs are trailing 1-0. And I know the game didn't end there, but it couldn't have started worse for the Leafs, and they'd better score the first goal tomorrow night.
Well,
there's no guarantee of that.
No. There's no guarantee of anything. Look, Tampa played the majority of the game with their two best defensemen. I assume they'll play game two without their two best defensemen.
Don't assume that, Bob. Don't assume that.
Well, I don't know. You don't know.
No.
I mean, they didn't play at the end of the game. So who knows what their future is. But there was no sign that they were any weaker without them. This is a team that I think has Tampa that has learned that what you do during the regular season really doesn't matter that much. And they have that switch. They can flip the switch and become a really good hockey team when they have to be. And I think they showed that last night.
And five other visiting teams did too. So yeah. Home ice advantage, 82 games. An NBA player was quoted the other day, I don't remember his name, as saying, we have 6 months of practice and then the season starts. And sure. they've extended the season with the play-in, which some people like and some people don't. But the NHL is like that too. There are a lot of teams that from the start aren't going to make the playoffs. In the end, there are a couple of underachieving Pittsburghs and Calgarys that don't quite make it. But otherwise, it's be ready when the playoffs start, and we'll decide from there. And if you're starting at home, it does not mean much, if anything.
The other part of this, David, is that last night, Braden Point showed up. Braden Point was great. Kucherov was great. The role players for the Lightning were great. Where were those guys for the Toronto Maple Leafs? Where was Austin Matthews? And I'm not looking at the score sheet. It doesn't matter what the score sheet tells you if you only score 3 and the other team scores 7. Ryan O'Reilly was the best player last night for the Maple Leafs, I think. But there are 4 or 5 players that should have been much better and need to be much better if this team's prepared to compete with with Tampa.
Well, when you are the underdogs, and I think John Cooper was saying stuff for psychological reasons. We coaches do that, but yeah, the Leafs were favored, and the Lightning was a clear underdog. And when you are in Tampa Bay's position, the only way you can win is to outwork the other team. And that's all they did last night, was outwork the Leafs right from the beginning. How many times in a normal Leaf game would you see so many pucks in a scramble near the goal crease. The Leafs, when they were playing well, didn't let the opposition get to that point. If they did, the Leafs were clearing the puck, or the goaltender was making the save. And last night, there were so many pucks in a scramble in front of Samsonov. Tampa Bay won most of the battles, and Samsonov didn't make the saves that he needed to make. So there's a team that won because they worked harder than the Leafs, even with defensemen who normally wouldn't be playing nearly as much as they did. Normally wouldn't be playing the NHL, really, if you want to name a couple of names. And then there's Vasilevsky, who was better than Samsonov. So, but boy, oh boy, the only good part for the Leafs is that it was game one, and not game seven. I mean, imagine if the Leafs don't win this series, they could play 6 more games very well and win 3 and lose 3 and be out in double overtime of game 7 or whatever on a bad penalty call. This is what is going to be remembered if they don't win this series. They got to get this out of their heads, out of the newspapers, off the TV and the radio as fast as they can.
But did they really challenge Vasilevsky at all last night? Honestly.
Well, they scored some goals, and I guess they could have scored some more, but there weren't that many good chances. But they got other problems. They won't have bunting, I'm sure, for 1 or more games, probably 1. So how do they replace him?
That might be a blessing.
What's that?
That might be a blessing, the way he played.
Well, is it Wayne Simmons? So you can, that's your version of Corey Perry, or you let the kid Matthew Nyes get into a playoff game and play up front on one of the first 2 lines, or the way the Leafs defense played last night, you might want to dress a 7th one of those just to give yourself some options. If they're as bad as they were last night, I'd want somebody else on the bench that I could employ. And then there's a goaltending decision. If you think there's one to be made, I would think it equals panic if you change from Samsonov to Wall. But
what would you do?
It might be in order. I don't know.
What would you do?
Well, I wouldn't panic. That's like Samsonov. Though the playoff record is now 1-7, I think he starts. I don't know if he finishes game 2, but I think it's a panic move if you change to a rookie goalie after 1 loss.
But this isn't the key to this whole thing, the Leafs' lack of confidence in the postseason based on their previous history. These guys all know that this team has not performed in the playoffs, that they've been fine in the regular season, sometimes great in the regular season. But when the playoffs come, they fall apart. They've lost how many first-round series in a row? And we know that. We talk about that. We talk about it all year. They know it too. And last night must have done nothing for their confidence. In fact, quite the opposite. And you wonder whether you can bounce back from that kind of a thing.
Yeah, well, that's the challenge that they have. Every year, that's the challenge. Every year since 1967, there's been a challenge to say, this isn't a team that is haunted by playoff ghosts. And, every team that makes the playoffs has a chance to change that narrative. And so many have failed. Here's another one that has another chance. You might accuse them of saying, our test is Boston. If they watched the Bruins against the Panthers, they wouldn't have been scared by anything they saw from Boston. I don't think the Bruins played very well in a kind of a scrambly type game. No Bergeron, and that always, although they seem to win without him in the season and now in the playoffs too. But if the Leafs are guilty of looking ahead, they're so much worse should be the criticism.